Hola a todos y a todas, buenas tardes de nuevo, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Estamos en la primera de nuestras sesiones con invitados en directo de este tercer día de Fiebre Photobook Fest 2020. Como podéis ver aquí, estamos con Michael MACK, que va a unirse luego su equipo de MacBooks. La sesión va a ser en inglés, así es que voy a introducirles brevemente en inglés as well. Hello to everyone watching the live stream in our session of Fiebre Photobook Fest 2020. Here we are with Michael Mack on my side. His team is going to be joining him in a minute as well to talk about publishing on a pandemic. So hello, Michael. I hope everything is all right on your side. I'm going to leave it to you. The screen is all yours now.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to introduce and talk a little bit about our publishing and what we've been doing recently, specific responses to this extraordinary time we've been living through, and then different elements of our small MACK team are going to talk you through their roles and how they individually have and collectively how we've responded to the pandemic and the impact that it's had. But I guess what I'd like to do actually is to start by hoping that all of you are safe and well, and your families and friends in these kind of quite extraordinary times. It's been difficult for all of us, for all of you, I'm sure. The challenges have been immense for many of us personally, as well as in terms of work. And in terms of work, it's kind of been extraordinary, actually, I would suggest, for us. It's been extraordinary because it began with the notion that everything would be impossible, that everything would stop, that there would be no way forward, and that we would have no business, that potentially we would no longer be able to make books and continue with our business. And in fact, the reality is that something wonderful has happened as a consequence of the changes that have been wrought. We've all stood still. We've all been largely based, very local to our homes. Most of us live very close to the studio that I'm speaking to you from. And we've had a small element of the team throughout lockdown still coming in and working here. But the slowing down, the lack of traveling in particular for me, the time to read and to think both in depth on the specific projects that we've committed to and that we're working on, to read more widely and to consider other ideas, to pay attention to the bookmaking process, which is not to say that we stopped doing that, but part of what happens as you grow and you have much more to do, and you have more book fairs and art fairs to travel to across the world and artists to visit, is you start finding that your available capacity, not just in terms of time but mentally, to focus on the most important part of the process, the collaboration with the author and the making. I suppose it just becomes thinned out. It becomes reduced. And so, 7 months on from the beginning of lockdown, or the first lockdown that we had, I can kind of categorically say that this period has been, for me, professionally, one of the most enjoyable periods of my working life, because it's required me or I've had the capacity to do the part of what it is we do in much more detail, to focus on those elements. And of course, the beauty of the digital age that we live in is that communication, I hate Zoom, by the way, so I've become a hater of most of these platforms, but the capacity to continue communication with partners in Tokyo, Los Angeles, across the kind of globe, continues, and we've all found ways to do that. The biggest challenge has been in terms of production, but we have a very brave and hardworking design and production team who've taken the biggest chances because they've been willing to travel through the pandemic to Europe to make our books. Again, without that, we would have had no books, and we would be in a very bad place. But in fact, extraordinarily, we've made 17 books through the last 8 months, and then in practical terms, what has happened is that whilst I think what's happened actually is that the world has changed in terms of the book world, changed in a way that it largely won't turn back. And by which I mean specifically the way in which people look at and buy books. Traditionally, a small publisher like us, even more so for much smaller publishers, their main focus would be direct sales to consumers, use of their own social media platforms, and fairs to sell their books. We have that. That's always been important to us. But we have also developed a really amazing distribution network through partner retailers, whether they're online retailers or bookstores across the globe, bricks and mortar bookstores. And of course, they are the partners who have suffered the most and continue to suffer. They're not seen as essential, so they're closed down. In the UK, they've just had to close down again. And it's really, really difficult for them. They have often they have expensive rents, which they are unable to meet because of the fact that they're not able to sell unless they also have an online platform. But what's happened as a consequence is that I think it's partly because people have much more time, that they've been able to kind of consider the projects that publishers like us do in more detail. And also that goes alongside, I believe, because of my belief in humanity, that people have also seen that, or know, immediately identified very quickly that if you purchase a book directly from a small business like ours, of course it's going to help us, rather than if you purchase it through Amazon or another third-party retailer where there's a layer cake of distribution and discounting. So we receive back a much smaller amount than if we sell it direct. So we've literally seen a revolution. I think a revolution in the sense of how we sell our books, and most excitingly, I think, our capacity to connect our authors and their ideas directly to an audience, directly to people interested in the books and interested in those ideas. And Liv and Jess, who run our press, marketing and events, they're going to talk about that because they've been kind of at the forefront of a process whereby we have seen our engagement just explode. And it's incredibly exciting. It's exciting because I think for me, the reason that I became a publisher, at one point, at one juncture, I was thinking, I was curating exhibitions and writing about photography and art. And I also made a few books. And it was at that moment that I became particularly interested in photography. And I realized, and this is back in the early 90s, that the relationship, an obvious one that we all know about, but the relationship of the photograph to the page and the book form is so fundamental, that the possibilities are so extraordinary. And I found that curation, especially in relation to photography and the wall. It was much more exciting to be dealing with the book form. So I chose the direction of moving into to bookmaking and publishing. But I learned pretty quickly that effectively the role effectively of a publisher is to build an avenue of access, a platform for dissemination of the ideas of our authors. So we choose our authors largely by their ideas, and then our job is to make the best possible book we can, but then to also do the really difficult work of taking that idea, taking that book and putting it out into the world in the most democratic way we possibly can. And hence, coming back to what the pandemic has done, is that in many ways it's closed the space between audiences and us. People feel to me to be much closer, much more engaged, directly engaged with what it is we're interested in as a small team of people making books and working with our authors than in the past. And the other extraordinary thing that's happened is that we've seen within a community, and by a community I don't just mean in terms of photography or even art, but in terms of media in general, media platforms in general, whether it's major Spanish newspapers or the New Yorker or a major institution in China, everybody has realized the need for collaboration. Everybody, in the past, it would be so difficult for us to access a particular museum to discuss with them doing a collaboration and a launch event, or it would be there'd be so many processes and favors required, and in the last 6 months it's extraordinary how everybody has just adopted the same policy, which is that we're all in a similar position. We need to be engaging with one another in order to maximize the possibility of how we can speak to the world. So institutions, of course, have been significantly challenged in the sense that they've access to physical spaces is so reduced. So they've also looked to their digital platforms and hence have been more willing to collaborate. So we found that extremely fruitful as a process. I suppose the most challenging part has been the most practical things, the practical things of printing and shipping physical objects around the globe. And that is still fraught with difficulties of, Trump and borders in America, simple things like that. Hopefully those sorts of things are changing pretty soon as we scrape him out of the White House. But those problems persist, and we've always had those problems with making physical books and distributing them. But in many other ways, the avenues of distribution have opened up in terms of ideas. And I think the other thing that has really crystallized for me in the course of the last, I don't know, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm frozen on my own screen. Hello. Hi, sorry, I froze, so I wasn't sure whether you could hear me. Hello? The whole thing froze, so I don't know whether we're still, there doesn't seem to be anybody else on the screen.
Oh, I think it's fine.
Sorry about that. the dangers of the challenges of digital communication. So I think the other fundamental thing that I want to focus on, the last thing really, is how this freedom has allowed me to spend more time focusing on a certain type of book that I've actually always been perhaps more interested in even than the photo book, if I'm honest. And that is books relating to critical theory, books relating to the relationship of text to image. And so we've developed a new series in the course of the past year, which are called Discourse. And they're short essays written by an artist or a curator or a commentator, just about one particular thread. And the idea is that they should be quite disruptive. They should be capable of kind of pushing against the current of contemporary thinking, or pushing up against institutionalized thinking. So the very first one we did came out actually at the same time as the opening in February at MoMA of a new Dorothea Lange exhibition, in which the MoMA curators' take on Lange's work was one particular approach, and a theorist in California had a quite different idea in relation to the interpretation of Lange's most famous photograph, Migrant Mother, and wanted to do a kind of tract which kind of pushed against the perceived notions, and for it to be distributed widely and available. And when I used the word democratically earlier, what I mean is largely one of cost, the fact that it can be accessible. So these books are I think they're €8, €9 maybe, very accessible. And that's become a really fantastic space of exploration for us, because it's excited a lot of people. A lot of people are coming to us with ideas, and we have this kind of whole fulminating, developing separate series of ideas that we are going to develop and we're going to put out into the world. And that goes alongside the publishing of theory books and books with visual artists who also write, which is a very rare breed, but in fact they're quite numerous. Lewis Boltz is an example, and he was a mentor of mine for many years when I worked at Stidle. And he's one very good example, but somebody like Alan Sekula is another. Victor Bergen is another, and I really believe, and it, in a sense, it comes out of a direct response and objection to the age of Trump and the age of politics we have in this country as well, which I feel is entirely stagnant and misplaced, and the need for there to be discourse around visual culture, for us to bring it into our dialogues, and to not simply accept that we live and subsist in a community where images and images alone can speak for themselves. And so we have many beautiful image-based books, but there needs to be more discourse. There needs to be more engagement beyond the beautiful book, the beautiful printing, the great binding. And I think that one of the main things that's happened through the pandemic is that a lot of those have I've seen many fewer books. Things are slowed down in relation to people's production. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. So talk to me in a year's time, and I'll maybe be able to be more reflective on whether the impact of all these things is more long term. But I do hope so. I'm actually incredibly positive about where we're at right now and the future. So I'm now going to hand over to our design and production team, who are here in this office with me. Morgan Crowcroft-Bryan is our head of design and production. She has worked here now for 4 years, apparently. God, as long as that. And started as an intern and has rapidly moved into the lead role in our design and production. And Carlotta Di Leonardo, who's our junior design and production person, who is setting up our Italian office, which will be opening in January, which is very exciting. I'll hand you over to them, and I'll be around later for any questions. If anybody has any questions, please do add them into the chat, and they can be passed through to us. Thank you again very, very much, firstly for having us to Fiebre Photo Book Fest, and to all of you for turning up. Much appreciated.
Hello, hi, I'm Morgan and this is Carlotta. Thank you all for being here today to listen to us talk. As Michael said, we all kind of at this stage don't like Zoom or Skype or online conversations. They feel very detached and you feel like you're not engaging with people, but I hope that through the chat maybe later that we can get some questions from you guys and hear some more from each of you. So the last, is it 8 or 9 months that we've been in this new world has been quite challenging and stressful, and a whole bunch of new skills and new ways of doing things have had to be quickly learned. The main hurdle for us, obviously, in design and production was the production of books. Usually every 6 months we have around 15 books that we produce with various printers around Europe. So as soon as lockdown hit, we sort of panicked and thought, what are we going to do? But thankfully, we were able to strategically time everything to that. We were still able to go to our German printers who weren't in the same kind of lockdown as our Italian printers, and just really strategically look and always be following the news about which country is closed and where can we visit without quarantining, and all these kind of extra kind of hoops to jump through, which most recently has been quite stressful with this new lockdown, with all the new lockdown measures throughout Europe. Has now meant that we can't print with our German printer, and they've now had to sort of hustle 5 books to be printed in 2 weeks' time with our Italian printer. So it's always, I found that generally it's been a period where you can't plan. You have to just kind of have a vague idea and then hope that the situation allows you to do that when you actually get to the time, because we have to order paper usually around 4 weeks for all the books that we print, and have binding schedules and have books on trucks and boats so that they go to all the warehouses. So it's a whole schedule system that's been put in place, but the minute you have a country that goes into lockdown, it just ruins all of that. So that has been the most ongoing stressful period, but I'm hoping that next year will be less stressful. Other challenges probably include not having the rest of the team here in our studio that's in South London. We're a team of 8 people, which includes 2 people in the sales team, 2 people in the press team, and then another person in sort of events and marketing as well. So, and then Michael and Carlotta and me. And so then to go from that team that's very bustling and we're always eavesdropping and talking and it's a very kind of noisy office, to then go to just having for the first, I think it was 6 months. Yeah. 6 months, it was just me and Carlotta in the office. was quite terrifying almost. And that while at first it was very fun to just be us two, I think at a certain point we were wanting everyone to come back just for that sense of community and sense of, working towards producing books. And we all work really hard, and just to have that, just to be part of that team just really means a lot. Thankfully, in the last couple of months, we've been able to have Michael back in the studio, which is really helpful, and one other team member. So we're slowly getting our community back. But yeah, that was a painful time as well. And then having to always ship out books to the rest of our team to see, and materials, and the list went on and on. That was the most stressful for me. I don't know if you have the same stress.
Yes, yeah, and of course the whole process was really slowed down because of this all things we had to do. So to show a paper, we had to send, as Morgan was saying, a sample, and then wait for it to arrive, and all these kind of things. So something that before was taking just it was really quick to do. Of course, it all slowed down the whole process.
It didn't help that the careers were really slow as well. So it just slowed everything down. But thankfully we were still able to make 17 books, which, when I think about it now, I don't know how we did it, but we did it. And we have another 5 printing in 2 weeks' time. I think it's it's now a permanent state that we're in of how to problem solve. So it's less stressful, but I'm hoping that it all kind of eases off in the next 6 months to a year, and hopefully we can all be back, and maybe not doing book fairs because that won't be possible, but at least engaging more with people. And I think that's the reason we're all working at MACK, is that we love books so much, and we love sharing that enthusiasm. And then just to be by yourself is quite it's quite tough. It's quite sad. So I'm hoping next year will be different. I'm really fingers crossed. But I'm going to pass you over to Jess and Liv, who are from our events and marketing team, and tell you a little bit about the strategies that they put in from their side, and how they dealt with, they were both working from home and also didn't have that engagement. So they're going to give you a little taster of what they were up to. So I'll pass you on to Liv and Jess.
Hello, hi. I'm Liv, and I run press and marketing here at MACK. So my job spans quite a few different elements, from working with journalists to sort of planning launches through to events and social media. And these are the things we're going to be focusing on today, in particular events, which is what I work with Jess on.
Yeah, so I'm Jess. I work alongside Liv on events, and also manage the First Book Award publishing prize that we do every year, as well as working on the more editorial side of our bookmaking as well.
Yeah, so I guess the best place to start when we're talking about publishing through a pandemic from the digital side is probably back in March, and we all sort of went home, and we were working out how we were going to make this work. Like I said, Jess and I both work on the launch program, so a huge amount of work per book goes into planning the physical launch events in different cities, which obviously we weren't able to do anymore. So, suddenly we're at home, and all the publishers are, institutions, bookshops, all the people we usually work with, were, madly trying to adapt and create content. And, it was quite a sort of unusual time. I mean, Jess, what do you remember about this time?
About that time, very particular time. Yeah, I mean, I remember there was about a week where all the events that we'd kind of spent months planning just were cancelled at once. And I think when lockdown hit London, there was a kind of real concerted effort within our entire team to focus on our kind of digital platform and output, with this kind of understanding that the online sphere had become really like the primary public space for communication around the world, and with obviously everyone being confined to their own homes. And obviously, as a publisher, we're experiencing difficulties not only in terms of printing books, but also facing the question of how to keep, engaged with our audience and the wider publishing community as well. And then, like you say, Liv, there was like a mad rush with artists and institutions and different digital platforms kind of generating and putting content online. And all our feeds almost seemed more saturated than usual. But I think it really showed that, regardless of everything going on, there was still a really big appetite for content that was engaging and discursive, and people kind of keen to keep collaborations continuing despite all the limitations. So yeah, it was interesting to see how everyone reacted to kind of this kind of community and collective space being limited to online only, and how people were trying to redefine what an event could be when confined to their own homes. And
yeah, for sure. I mean,
and like trying to like navigate this new sense of normal as well. I think we both kind of struggled with it a lot. But yeah, it was interesting as well to see how people were experimenting with different formats as well with events. At first it seemed like there were loads of Instagram live events, talks and panel discussions via Zoom, obviously, but also people being creative and trying to figure out how to put on things like this, like book fairs, events that are usually really important things in the publishing world every year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, was there anything that stood out for you at the time that you kind of remember watching and thinking that was sort of something different or exciting?
Yeah, I mean, there was so much. I think a few things that really stuck out were self-published Be Happy masterclasses. I thought they were really great. Atelier Nua's talks, Verso Books critical series. But I think, as Michael mentioned earlier, there seemed to be a huge amount of openness and willingness to collaborate amongst different publishers and platforms and artists, and kind of more openness than usual as everyone was going through the same strange experience. And I think in response to this, and to keep up our engagement with our audience, we created the MACK Live series together. And the idea was to kind of stream a video each week with an artist that we worked with. And it really allowed us to be experimental with the format, to sort of not doing just talk events like we would normally at book launches, but doing bookshelf tours, studio tours, film screenings, and readings as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think as well, what was fun and what still kind of continues to be fun with MACK Live is that it sort of allows us to think beyond the book itself in a way, and to think about ways that we can create live events that also are able to kind of showcase an artist's broader practice, like you're saying, with sort of their artist films or with any other sort of, the kind of broader ways in which they work, rather than, as well as the book.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for example, being able to screen films that were a key part of their project, like Mayumi Hasakuro's short film, or the extract from Richard Moss's incoming work, both of which were fundamental components as well to their book projects. I think, what was important as well was for us to sustain during this period was this idea of publisher being kind of a platform for learning, exchanging ideas, and alongside the production of books as well. But also thinking about the advantages of being able to organize all these events online and remotely was that, for example, we could screen a Q&A with two people at opposite sides of the world, which is something in normal circumstances it wouldn't be our usual way of working. So it kind of pushed us to do things differently. And I think as well from an audience point of view, right, from the accessibility element was really important.
Yeah, definitely. And that was a key thing for us when we started out, was to make these talks free and available to everyone, least of all because during this time so many people were in precarious situations in terms of their jobs. But we also, we realized that we had an opportunity here, and as kind of Michael mentioned, our audience isn't, is very global. So, it's in the UK and the US and Europe and South America. We have a big audience in Japan, and when you're working with physical events, you're naturally restricted to the major cities, either that the artists are based in or where they travel for exhibitions. And so, when we made MACK Live, we realized that there was an opportunity here to do these screenings and talks to reach people that are outside of the major cities, and also people who might not have otherwise had the opportunity to go to the physical book launches. And then, when we were thinking about accessibility, we worked, and in terms of reaching different territories, for many of the events, we worked to subtitle them in different languages. So, for example, we screened the conversation with Stephen Shaw and Britt Salverson earlier this year, with multiple screenings for different audiences in the UK, US, France, Spain, and Japan. And so all of these events happen across the course of the week. And, this was really exciting. And it was also something that we'd been wanting to do for a long time and hadn't had the chance to because, in life before lockdown, really.
Yeah, definitely. I think, the limitations of the pandemic kind of pushed us to create something that, like you said, we wouldn't have before had time for. And now we have this archive of content that people can access from around the world after the events have screened, which hopefully will just be a really useful resource for people in the future. So it's great to be doing online events that aren't just one-off, but have longevity. But what about the kind of social media side of things? Did you notice any changes in people's engagement, and did you have to adapt to that at all?
Yeah, it's interesting because, as I'm sure everyone watching will remember, from the start of lockdown, and as you mentioned, Jess, there was a really sort of endless amount of Instagram lives, which are which are absolutely brilliant. But it was kind of interesting watching how they worked. And I think for all the benefits of them, one way they failed was to have the sort of holding power or the longevity that you were talking about. So, you'd go, I remember, you'd go onto Instagram at 6 p.m. and there'd be, 10 different Instagram lives happening, and you could go onto them and watch them, but just as easy you could sort of leave. And I think that, my sense of people's attitudes on social media from the start, and definitely something that I felt myself, was, having a real appetite for creative and academic engagement, and, to be watching and thinking about basically anything that wasn't the pandemic. And so, I think what we wanted to do was to sort of create content that somehow like satisfied that wish to be connected and to be stimulated. So that was something that was kind of always on my mind when I was not, both with regards to social media and our wider digital platform. But, this is something I'd be interested to see when, as we come out of the pandemic. I'm kind of interested to see how this changes and how people interact online once bookshops open again and once physical events come back into people's lives. And, I'll be interested to see how people engage with the abundance of really amazing digital content that's out there. And, it's hard to tell. I don't know what you think, how that's going to work.
Yeah. I think in terms of things going back to how they were before, kind of like supporting the publishing community, it was really important to us in terms of the online events that we were supporting the bookshops, that when they weren't able to be open, so partnering with them on online events, for example. And and like, yeah, as Michael mentioned, bookshops have obviously suffered a lot during this period, and they're such a key part of the publishing world, so it was really important to keep up that collaboration as much as possible. But yeah, it's interesting to think about how things will change in the future. Though in London, of course, right now it doesn't feel like that's going to happen for a little while. It still seems like events with a lot of people is far off. But from an events point of view, I think, yeah, the pandemic has really loosened up the form of events, and people have realized it's possible to create events online that are just as engaging as they are in a physical space. So that's been quite liberating. And I think also, as an aside, being able to see artists in their own context and their studios and gaining more of a personal insight into their practice and their working environment. But, you know, of course, like, it's a huge loss as well. Really miss the more like the ad hoc nature and the more organic nature of bookshop events, where audience can have the chance to talk to the authors at the end, to ask questions. Yeah, sort of sharing that common space and having that kind of casual, connected human exchange. So yeah, I think thinking about the next phase of this, having seen bookshops suffer quite a lot during this period, you know, I expect and I hope that, you know, there will be a real community focus to kind of support bookshops and the physical spaces and events themselves, and perhaps people will be more drawn to them as they kind of tire of online content too. But I do think these things can coexist, and I think that we've all learned that there can be kind of different modes of collective reflection, and there's pros and cons of both. But yeah, the fact that we've been able to create kind of meaningful engagement digitally, it's been really eye-opening for both of us, and quite liberating. And we've seen how important it is, I think, in particular, to make these things as accessible as we can to people around the world, and to kind of create an archive of content for artists, for students. So yeah, I hope this will continue.
Yeah, so do I. And, you know, hopefully there's a sort of balance that can be struck in the future between, you know, both sort of creating events that support the bookshops while also maintaining this accessible, you know, open platform events online, like, you know, Fiebre Photo Book Festival. So I think at this point, we're going to bring back the rest of the team and for a couple of questions. So I think that's going to happen now. Let's see. Great. Hello, everyone again. So I've got one question from the chat here, and someone is asking, does the author choose the printer with you? So how does that work in terms of, working with printers, working with the authors?
No, the author doesn't choose the printer. You know, the fact is, I've made more books than any artist. So, you know, if somebody comes with a project that's to be printed on uncoated paper, then there are only 2 printers we know in the whole of Europe we would choose to work with. And the relationships with printers are historical and long-term business relationships. So, it's I wouldn't say it's nothing to do with the author, because we ask the author to be there on press and help us to see out the printing process. But, you know, those sorts of decisions, because we're the one, we as a publishing house, we don't take any money from authors. We pay authors royalties and pay their costs. So, you know, we make the commercial decisions about which printers to go to, and we collaborate with the authors and artists in relation to all the choices. But ultimately, that's our decision because it's our contract with the printer.
Great.
So, you know, those things are quite complex, really.
Definitely. I have another question, which probably is best for you to answer, Michael, again. But the question is, what financial impact has the pandemic had on publishing in general and MACK Books in particular?
Well, I think that it's kind of widely seen at the moment that publishing is one of the arenas that's done quite well, in the sense that people have bought a lot of books, in the sense that turnover has not been too bad. But if I'm completely honest, without going into the details of it, the number of books we've sold is down significantly because the major retailers we work with across America, for example, or across the globe, have not been operating at full capacity. They've only been open for a short period in the course of the last 7 to 9 months. But without going into the boring detail, what has happened is that because, as I touched on when I was speaking, we have made many more sales directly to buyers. We've made more money from those sales. So in a sense, things have balanced out. We sold less books, but we're still profitable, and we've done very well, in fact. And I think that any publisher who has good distribution chains has experienced that. Any publisher that has stock ready and has been continued operating and selling through lockdown and through the pandemic has done extremely well. I would imagine that for some publishers, the difficulty has been when their distribution channels had dried up, when they were incapable of sending books out, then it would have been very, very difficult. We've been very fortunate because we have systems and have always had systems in place with 4 warehouses around the world, which allow us to continue, selling to people and fulfilling those sales. So it's that's what I meant when I was talking about how I think things have changed fundamentally, and it might not be a bad thing in the long term. That you would make less sales, but you would make enough from a smaller number of sales to sustain the publishing house and to sustain each of the books. And that seems like quite a holistic future, to be honest with you. So we'll see. My biggest worry, I think, is actually less to do with the publishers than it is to do with our retail partners. Many of the small, dedicated bookstores. I really worry for them, as I mentioned, partly because I imagine that many of them have rents, and that even if they're not high, they have rents they have to meet, and if they're not making many sales, it must be really, really tough. So I think in the back of my mind, that's my biggest concern, that we will lose some of those really important partners. And to be frank, in different cities, they're kind of like the heartblood of our communities, these places where we know, or where people who are interested in our books can go and see them, or people who are interested in certain aspects of visual culture can go and they can stumble across our books without even knowing anything about us or one of our authors. And they're fundamental to our existence. And so we're trying to do what we can to help to sustain them, but it's of course not the same in every country as well, and it's everybody has different struggles and different governmental regimes to fight. So yeah, that's the biggest worry, and I think that might be one of the things that changes a lot long term. The other thing I think that will change is going forward is, and it's interesting because all the people you see on screen now, we all spend a week, 10 days in Paris in November because we do 2 fairs at the same time there, and one or more of us always goes to different fairs across the globe, and I think it remains to be seen, but I don't think that art and book fairs, I don't think they're all going to come back. I don't see that they're all sustainable. And I think that's partly because the galleries, who of course are the heart of the art fairs in particular, rather than the publishers. The galleries have found ways of selling online through their virtual platforms and are doing quite well by all accounts. So they are not necessarily going to be convinced by the idea that they have to spend, depending where they are in the world, 50, 60,000 euros to go to Paris to do an exhibition, to do a fair for 5 days. So I think that may be another casualty going forward. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I miss going to New York in September. I missed that this year, really did. And I think we normally would be here in Paris right now, wouldn't we? And I'm missing Paris. It's true. So I am looking forward to doing some traveling again. But I don't actually think it was sustainable. The situation, the way we were all traveling so much.
It's always a nice opportunity, though, isn't it, to meet, I guess, kind of directly meet the people who are buying books from us. I think that's kind of what I personally always enjoy about the fairs is, to actually talk to people and to be able to physically watch people pick up the books and go through them. And, I think that's a really key thing that I've sort of missed not going to those fairs, is having that sort of direct engagement, which you can get from some, in some respects through social media or, through events like this, but it's never quite the same as being able to, see the way people actually navigate the books and, pick them up. And
that's true. And the other thing that I miss from the fairs is obviously also seeing the artists and the other publishers, but also seeing all the other books, because I would spend a lot of my time there going around, particularly off print, and spending a lot of time with the and the what's the boat called, the polycopies, and discovering extraordinary projects and learning a lot, to be honest with you, I miss that. So I feel that I haven't seen as many books this year, obviously, as I would normally, and that's a bit of a hole. Mind you, we've got our first book award coming up soon, and last year we received 500 submissions, and that's always an amazing way to see what people are interested in and what's happening. Did you guys talk about that at all? Have we mentioned that?
Very briefly, not properly.
Yeah, because I do think that that's something that's worth kind of touching on, because it's coming up for next year is the 10th year that we've been doing the award, and it's really at the heart, I think, of what MACK is about. It's true, relatively easy to publish Alex Soth or Luigi Giri compared to a brand new, completely unknown artist. But that's one of the reasons that I started the award, was the idea that we know that if we take somebody completely unknown, we have the opportunity to help them to build their career. And a book in many ways is kind of the best form to do that for certain artists, because the work will travel much more widely than if they have an exhibition. They might not necessarily make as much money as if they had a good gallery represent them. That's a different conversation. But a book will disseminate the work really, really widely. And we've helped, in the course of the 10 years, we've helped a lot of people to kind of move forward with what they're doing, and many of them are still working with us. And I believe it's a quite valid kind of process for people to be involved in. And we now have a wonderful partner in London called Weber Gallery, who will now do an exhibition there, a private mainstream central London gallery who survived by selling prints. And so that's an opportunity to begin a relationship from the artist with a gallery, and to have an exhibition which is all financed through the award as well. So I find that one of the most exciting periods of the year. It's overwhelming because the whole of the studio gets filled with all these submissions and the paperwork and everything related to it. It's all run by Jess, and but it does allow us to see an extraordinary array of work and also to get a little bit of a sense of what people are interested in, because they do come from across the world, literally from across the world. We see a lot of submissions from places as far from us as Japan and Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, India, a lot from India, and then through Europe, through all regions of Europe. So it's exciting for us, and I think it feeds into our creativity, into our understanding of what is any good. To be honest with you, it's a good process, a difficult one, but it's a good process to go through all those books.
For sure. Also, probably worth saying it opens on Monday. So if anyone opens on Monday. So if you do have if there's anyone watching who has a unpublished book project that you want to submit, it's free to submit. So I reckon we probably have time for one or two more questions. And so one person has asked, how are we experimenting these days with other formats, so such as ebooks, things like that? So yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's interesting that we have gone back to publishing ebooks, and actually Carlotta is about to take over the production of our ebooks. But this comes with quite a long history for me. So the books that we're publishing as ebooks now are primarily books which are in that discourse series that I touched on, which are primarily text-based with a few illustrations occasionally, which makes the formatting of the books viable in the sense that not just that it's easy to convert them, but they are legible across a multitude of different hardware and access points. I did spend a number of years under another company that I set up, attempting to develop kind of complex digital books, and it was a failure. It didn't work. We were working with some great, amazing content, not just the content that I publish as MACK, but we were working with Victoria and Albert Museum on catalogues for them and doing really kind of complicated objects, each of which had to be adapted for the specifics of what I referred to as the walled gardens. The specifics of the different tech companies and their platforms. So whether it would be Windows or whether it be Apple or whether it be Google, and the problem was that the more complexity you built in, the more difficult it was to maintain, because you had to maintain according to each of their regimes as they updated their operating systems. And we started realizing it simply wasn't viable. So hence the notion that doing it with less complex content and making it easily accessible is an answer. But I think perhaps the most interesting point to make about the digital books was I started that when in 2010, when I was in New York and saw the queue outside the Apple Store on 14th Street for the first iPad when it was being launched, and thought, gosh, this does suggest a new direction, a new future to the way in which people read. But I think that what's interesting in the past decade is that actually the reverse is true, that rather than us all changing our habits fundamentally to only reading on screens, I think the burgeoning and the explosion of physical book publishing has been a direct pushback to that notion. People are much more interested in relation to certain content, in relation to a lot of books which are based around art, in the physical object, in the tactile object, in the experience of the physical object in the hand, and that was actually a really great lesson to learn, that a well-made art book is hard. You can't beat it in any other shape or form, simply, and it kind of reinvigorated actually my interest in making physical books.
And I think that's why, sorry, because another element digitally we focused on because of this reason is the fact of trying to show digitally the actual books. So trying to make people understand how the proper the physical thing looks like, how the texture could be. So we really focused on, we developed all our photos we took, and the idea of taking close-ups of books and taking videos to really show the physical object and try to make people understand what the feeling is of the object in your hand.
Yeah, that's become an important part. You're right. And that's one of the things that we will have in our new Italian office is a studio for the production of our digital assets.
I think as well, I guess with the discourse series in particular, which is our kind of short essay series, that as well has been an opportunity for us to sort of in a format that seems to work as an ebook because there's less images, and because the very nature of the essays are that they're sort of on a single subject, and they kind of, I think they fit much better into that format. I suppose. So I guess we have time for one more question, and it's quite a broad one. But how does everyone, or what's the sense of how the UK government is and isn't supporting publishing houses during this time?
Well, yeah, I don't think that there have been any particular measures in support of publishing per se. It's been, it's, as with all governments, it's been a focus on. I don't think publishing as a sector has received specific finance, but small businesses have, and the support hasn't been bad, to be honest with you. It has been offered, and if you wanted to take it up, it was readily available. But I guess what I would say is that I took a decision to, rather than stop and hold our breath and wait and see what happened through lockdown, we all kind of spoke, and I said, well, we can either do that, or everybody can literally re-educate themselves in terms of how publishing works and what we need to do, and learn new skills, and we can try and kind of do something new with our publishing. And to everybody's credit, that's exactly what everybody has done in the last 7-8 months. And it has been extraordinary, because I think we've achieved in 4 or 5 months what I was hoping we would do in about 3 years in relation to our platform digitally, in terms of what we were able to offer and the community we could develop around it. So in a sense, we kind of were a little bit blinkered. We decided just to put our heads down and use this quieter time to just work really hard in the background on both the books, but also the capacity we have as a company and how it operates. And everybody you see on the screen, and everybody, and the people beyond as well, have all worked really hard on the really, really nitty-gritty detail at an operational level. So I think, like all governments, our government has been, has made flawed attempts to sustain business, but I don't feel that we've particularly suffered from a lack of attention from them. In fact, what's happened in America with the Black Lives Matter movement and other cultural issues around that and linked to lockdown. We've felt quite fired to make numerous other changes and step forward separate from kind of the notion of government support, and to push against kind of, existing notions of the way things should be. And that's actually been revitalizing in many ways, in the way that I've tried to suggest the pandemic has been for our approach to what we all do.
Everything your microphone.
So the one thing I was told to do was to unmute my microphone. I was going to say that was really quite a good note to end on. So yeah, thank you everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
And